Gentlemen, we got to get right into this because these fine folks in the chat are here to hear about video games and more specifically about Call of Duty not being dead. I was told by several of the pony community, and of course, not the PlayStation gamers. They just want to play games and have fun. I'm talking about the trolls of the internet that obviously, because Microsoft was going to own and operate Activision, that Call of Duty was dead, right? You guys remember that, right? Because I certainly do. I also remember that there was a stout pushback on Call of Duty Black Ops 6 being dropped into Game Pass. And oops, what happened last year? It did. Now, of course, we did see some stories run about, well, they lost $200 million because it was in Game Pass. And you know what's interesting? Not only was it the best-selling game of last year, if you really want to see how big of a deal Call of Duty is on PlayStation, all you have to do, Crispy Bomb, is look to a list that became public knowledge this year where Sony dropped a listing of their best-selling games in the past 20 years. And do you know what was at number 6 on that top 10 list? That would be a game that came out last year. Now, I just want some context here. This was a list that dictated the top 10 best-selling games in PlayStation franchise history. And one of those games was Black Ops 6. But I was told, Crispy, that, well, Call of Duty was dead. Now, of course, Black Ops 7 comes out, and it's a down year, sure. It's not the best. The single-player campaign is a bit wacky, to be honest with you. And, the new season started with giant knives being thrown into the ground. And I was like, oh, this is very Scarecrow-esque for me. But I'm all about that, multiplayer life. But even with all of that said, even with it being one of the worst reviewed Call of Duties, what do you know about that, Crispy Bomb? That it's number 1 on PlayStation again. It's number 1 on Xbox again. And look what it's beating. It's beating Arc Raiders. It's beating Battlefield 6. But Crispy, I thought that Call of Duty was dead. Can you elaborate on this? Can you help us understand what is happening here?
It's dead because they want it to be dead, and that's about it. I mean, if you look at their sales, it is what it is. And I always look to the socials, and I saw all the complaints in the world about the campaign, but I have seen Jack Diddley squat about the multiplayer, which means it's got to be pretty darn good. So, that's their cash cow. That's what they go for. If the multiplayer is good on COD, people are going to pick it up. And, there's a lot of people kind of, dying off of some of these games like Arc Raiders. Like, I see a lot of people like, I don't feel the urge to play it anymore. And maybe that's just the toxicity that has been happening in that game lately. Or it's just that it doesn't really have a new game plus feel to it. Like they feel like they're doing the same thing over and over again. But COD is COD. I mean, you have your prestiges, you have all of these things that you can earn. And, it's one of those things like, yeah, maybe it's not as big on Steam this time. You don't know why, though. Maybe we'll find out later some numbers on, how many people went to Game Pass instead of purchasing on Steam, or, maybe they did pick up a PlayStation 5 or an Xbox over time and decide to play there instead because of, we hear about the anti-cheat stuff and things like that. So, I mean, in realism, we all said it, when this started, transpiring of, oh, it's no good and this and that. The game is fine. It's not for me. I mean, that's what it is. So if it's not for me, it doesn't mean it's not for somebody else. And the COD players, they probably tried out Arc Raiders. They probably went to Battlefield. Battlefield's a different game. I mean, it's for a different subset. It has vehicles. It has all these things that are different. Is it a first-person shooter? Yes, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't have its niche now. And, they went back to the formula. Maybe COD, if they want to sell more, because, I don't feel like it's going to sell more than Black Ops 6, but that doesn't mean it's not a success. And I think that's something that, we look over time and you say, well, what's the value to Microsoft or Activision that it goes into Game Pass? Well, I think it has tremendous value, because if you get them in on just one game and then they finally get bored of it, and then all of a sudden you got all these other games coming out, and then you got people potentially hooked on it. So, we'll see how it all pans out as far as, sales compared to Black Ops 6. But in general, I mean, I see it doing the same thing it's always done, selling, and, clearly it's showing as of now.
Yeah. I mean, it continues to sell. It continues to, I mean, listen, again, the season 1 just started, right? And it's going to garner a significant amount of playtime. I mean, I'm playing it. And you got to remember, folks, this is coming from somebody that hasn't played Call of Duty multiplayer like this since the Xbox 360 days. Now, granted, sure, is it exactly the same? I mean, things change. This might not be the greatest Call of Duty when you look at the single player campaign, but I gotta be honest with you, outside of some of the actual devices and weapons, like, it took me a while to actually find a couple of the guns that I really enjoy for Black Ops 7. Like, I didn't play the single player. I know there's a lot you can unlock by doing that, including your level for multiplayer. My almost second prestige has been only multiplayer. I have not played any of the single player. But what's interesting is you're seeing more and more people go back to Call of Duty, because Crispy, you made a point that was really interesting. You mentioned Battlefield 6. Now, Battlefield 6 specifically is a different type of first person shooter. It is very team based. It is skill based. It is and again, I am glad that they at least opened up where you're not stuck with being this class and you have to use these weapons. I know that they did change that, because a lot of people like me would not play it because I want to play a specific class, but I don't want to be stuck using those weapons. So that's good. But I played the beta and I thought it was okay. I used to be a huge, I mean, when I say huge Battlefield dude, many years ago, that ship has sailed. And I think for a lot of people, everybody really wanted Battlefield to come back because competition is king, right? If Battlefield 6 continues to do better, well, Black Ops 7 is going to have to be even better if they want to have, people stay in the ecosystem and, more importantly, come back to it at some point. Let's bring in Korkenstein and get your thoughts on this, because again, the one thing that I consistently see on social media, and more so, and again, folks, I don't like to throw people under the bus, which is why we don't do the names thing here. But, when you look at games media, I think that we know that the automatic or, go-to is anti-Xbox, because why? It's going to garner clicks. It's going to garner people that are going to click on it, and clicks are what has become, unfortunately, the driving force for games media. It's just what they do. And what we continue to see, Cork, is at every turn, everything about Call of Duty and Xbox seems to be taken out of context in a way where no matter what they do, no matter how they do, they're going to try and spin it as negative. But the numbers don't lie, right? The numbers are here. We have them in front of us, ladies and gentlemen. Let me get your thoughts on this, because again, the whole narrative for Call of Duty since the confirmation of Xbox owning them as first party has been Call of Duty will never be the same. Turns out that it's not only the same, but it's bigger than ever before. Let's get your thoughts.
I gotta say, I had my doubts with Call of Duty. I'm gonna be honest. I didn't think it would ever not be outsold by anything else. I mean, it's gonna be king for a while. With Battlefield 6 and Arc Raiders, there's more competition in the marketplace right now. And I think Call of Duty, the reason why this one kind of wasn't as well received is because it just rested too much on its laurels of what it used to do. And it's just the game's changed, literally. The genre's changed, everything about it. And people are looking for new experiences. They're looking for things like that. And was Call of Duty ever going to be outsold? No, that wasn't going to happen. Do I think if they continue on this path of subpar campaigns, not really addressing the anti-cheat, when you look at it compared to other games, especially Battlefield 6, it's leagues above. I think Battlefield 6 has Javelin, and Call of Duty has Ricochet. They both use the kernel boot and all that stuff to safe boot or secure boot, I think it's called, and other safeguards. But that takes a drain on people. So I think the player base, I think they're not gravitating away more so to Call of Duty because it's necessarily or inherently bad. I think it's just more so that there's so much new stuff and so much competition and so much. And since it's more of the same with Call of Duty, they want those new experiences. So I think that's why sales. But as Call of Duty gets longer, and more support for it, we should see those numbers grow a lot more than what they already are. Now Call of Duty reports on Call of Duty HQ instead of Battlefield 7.
Yes.
Or Black Ops 7 and stuff. So now this is a cumulative kind of thing. So we'll see what happens. I do think Call of Duty does need to change. It's not just because I'm a big Battlefield guy. I do think that we're in a new space where they have to change, and I think they tried to do it last minute. To anticipate for Arc Raiders and Battlefield 6, but it was just too late. I know this will never happen, and you guys can throw the digital, tomatoes at me for this. I think they should take a year off, or they should do campaigns biannually. So every other 2 years we get a campaign, or every other year we'll get a campaign, if that makes sense. Keep the multiplayer new, fresh, work solely on the multiplayer, and then you can add that campaign in a year later, if that makes sense, So Call of Duty is a beast. It's its own thing, and that's the whole reason why Microsoft paid what was it, $72 million or whatever, $80 million for it.
Billion.
Yes, yeah, billion.
Yes.
It's this is the reason why, because it just prints money. So we'll see how Xbox kind of shifts their strategy with it. Like I said, but I do hope they kind of rein it back a little bit and start with something fresh. Start, the biannual campaign, or just take a full full year off, rest on the multiplayer and microtransactions and Warzone, and then just come back really reinvented, revigorated, refreshed. And bring real competition back to Battlefield 6 and Arc Raiders, like they did to Call of Duty.
Well, what's interesting? So why I think they can't actually take a year off is because when you look at the multiplayer space, Fuzzy Belvedere, you're talking about, again, we're going back to the mains, right? You go back to Apex Legends, you go back to Fortnite, you go back to Call of Duty. Those have run and reigned supreme for quite some time. Those are the three. Warzone certainly might not be as big as it used to be, which is why they, between Warzone and Black Ops 6 and now Black Ops 7, which is why they report it as, Call of Duty HQ, because they have, like, it would be really difficult to try and single these games out. Now, whether that's because one isn't doing as good as the other, or they're just too big of IPs to kind of put them out there by themselves, so they just put them together. I think if you look at the numbers, Call of Duty with those three games versus something like an Arc Raiders, even though Arc Raiders is doing phenomenally well, I think it's probably going to go down as one of the biggest surprises of 2025. It is taking gamers away from everywhere, not just Call of Duty. You're talking about players that who normally are Fortnite mains and Apex Legends mains want to get in on this game. Now, granted, it's very different when you talk about the play styles, but people like yourself and Mav and our crew in the DM are playing it almost every day and very much enjoying it. I have not dabbled into it because the truth of the matter is that one of the biggest things I don't have enough enough of in 2025, and it looks like it may be the same thing in 26, is time. I don't have enough time. I can't. I mean, I want to enjoy Call of Duty. I want to enjoy all these single player games. I cannot add another multiplayer game. It's just no way. But some people can do that, and if you can, good for you. But the whole point of this conversation is to prove that the trolls were wrong, right? That's what this comes down to. They said Call of Duty was dead, as probably as much as they've said Xbox has been dead. And again, every week we hear the block of numbers come out. And even though, like I said, this is not really Steam we're talking about, because Steam is its own monster, but we're talking about consoles. And when you look at the numbers on console, every week, Call of Duty on either platform, meaning PlayStation or Xbox, is either number one or number two. And they continue to do that week in and week out for a franchise that just put out one of its weakest entries in a very long time. And you know what I equate this to, Fuzzy, is what happened with Modern Warfare 3. We all know that was supposed to be an expansion, and they made it into a game because they're greedy, and that's what they did. And what wound up happening? It was and not reviewed, bombed, because it wasn't done on purpose, or maybe it was because that was at the time when Xbox officially became the owner and operator of it. So maybe there was a little bit of that. But to be honest, it wasn't one of their best entries. But you know what it was? The best-selling game in that year.
Yeah.
I mean, so I want to get your thoughts on this, on Call of Duty not being dead, despite the pundits and the trolls saying that it is.
I think I had said this shortly before Battlefield 6 was released, and I was really excited for Battlefield 6, and it did well for a Battlefield game, and that was to be expected. But remember when that like Future War trailer was like the most downvoted, Call of Duty ever, and I think that thing did like 11 million in like 2 weeks. So for what was at that time viewed as one of the worst games or one of the worst Call of Duties, and it outsold everything that same year in a matter of like 2 weeks. Call of Duty is going to keep its crown for, I would say, quite a while. The only thing that will knock the crown off of their head is themselves, or a bunch of other games really stepping it up and being consistent year after year after year for at least the next 10 to 15 years to at least catch up to the momentum that Call of Duty has. There's always going to be off years where it's like, I don't particularly like this Call of Duty, and it still sells better than most, if not all, games that year. And in some cases, the top two or three combined. But it shouldn't be underestimated just how valuable that IP is to gamers. And yes, the vocal minority that's on social media talking about Call of Duty's dead. Forget day after day that a majority of our friends that aren't part of that vocal minority that just get on and game when they can after work or on the weekend, and they're either playing Madden or 2K or Call of Duty, and that's pretty much all they buy, with maybe a few exceptions, or maybe the game that came with the console when they purchased it, kind of thing. That's like, I wouldn't say it's like a religion, because I don't want to cross those lines or offend anyone, but for many, that is their escape. Like after you've had a crappy week at work, what better way to relax than pop some people's heads in video games and whatnot, and
Not in
and
real
go about
life.
your
Let's make
business.
sure that's clear. Not in real life.
Right, exactly. But that's the thing. It's like this game, Call of Duty, is going to continue to do numbers year after year until there's something more appealing. Like, sure, Fortnite has its moments and Fortnite has its own following, but Call of Duty has just as much of a following, if not greater, and it's been around much longer. So it's harder to pull people away from that. I wouldn't say addiction, but that game where it's like, oh, I don't know what to play. Oh, let me just hop on Call of Duty with the boys type of thing. And that's a regular routine for many. So I don't know why people think or want to say that Call of Duty is dead. maybe in 10 years, if there's 10 bombs of Call of Duty campaigns or multiplayer things where they completely don't listen to the audience, but considering how much money's on the line, they might do that maybe one, maybe twice in a row at most before some heads roll and some sit down conferences happen where they actually try and listen to the majority, and then they'll wind up giving the fans what they want, at least for that particular installment. But this is a business. It's not going to die off without it being a long, slow, painful death type of thing. And I don't see the rest of the industry stepping up year after year, constantly or consistently making a hit that's going to topple Call of Duty. Like, you there's no way to, well, just for example's sake, there's no way to release a God of War every year for the next 20 years and have it be a banger all of those 20 years. It's not going to happen. They
Right.
need 4 to 8 years, depending on if they're reusing assets, to make the next title. So there's no way, unless Sony is going to all of a sudden get acquired by a deep pocket company like Amazon or Apple, that they're going to be able to build that many teams to have something like a God of War come out year after year. But once again, that would be a single player game, and you wouldn't have a multiplayer component that would pull people away from Call of Duty. And even if you look at some of the big multiplayers, like Arc Raiders stands that chance, but we'll see how things go after people figure out if it's worthwhile to opt into the wipe or just continue to progress without doing the wipe. That's like the teetering point, and that's the thing that's been difficult for games like Escape from Tarkov, and with Arc Raiders doing something a little bit different. We'll see how that pans out. But even then, like, this has to be a game that 20 years from now, there's the same excitement that we had a month ago in 20 years. And if that's the case, then maybe Call of Duty might lose its shine at that point. But it's not happening overnight, and it's not going to happen in the next couple of years. It would take a decade or more for us to see some sort of negative result. And you know, I wish the pundits would realize that, because that should be part of their job as far as understanding how big something like Call of Duty is. It's like Ford isn't going to fail overnight. Sure, they've participated in the bailout, although the previous bailout in '08, I don't think they were part of it. It was just Chrysler and GM. But a company like that isn't going to die overnight. It takes years and years of them, slow cuts or death by a million cuts kind of thing. And that would be an almost any industry. Although we could get into financial institutions on another time, but as far as video games are concerned, Call of Duty is not going anywhere until either Microsoft or the dev teams behind it or all of the above decide otherwise. So that's all I got.